All right, welcome everybody. My name is Brian Hartman, and we are here today at Pharus Global for our Live at 5. This is episode number 8. We are here live at Ferris Plaza, 1859 Southeast Port St. Lucie Boulevard in Port St. Lucie. We are excited today. We have a very special guest. Dr. Joel Rosen is the founder of the Truth About Adrenal Fatigue.com. He's an expert in repairing the broken stress response system in the body, resetting the circadian rhythms in the body that impacts all body system, including the HPA axis. He is a chiropractic physician extraordinaire, I must say. I have good reason for saying that. I have some family that was patient of Dr. Joel's, and actually he fixed them up pretty well. A certified functional medicine practitioner and utilizes his undergraduate degrees in exercise physiology and psychology, as well his training in nutrigenomics and epigenetic in order to custom build recovery programs. We're going to have to ask Dr. Joel about those things. His private practice is located in Boca Raton, Florida, but his coaching clients reside all over the world. Dr. Joel hosts his podcast, Your Adrenal Fix. Joel is passionate about impacting the practice of healthcare versus sickness care and has made it his personal mission to educate doctors and patients alike on the truth about adrenal fatigue and how the impact of stressors impact more than the adrenals, right up to the cellular level. Joel suffered with his own adrenal fatigue health concerns and now educates tens of thousands of clients around the world. And without further ado, let's welcome Dr. Joel Rosen.
Hey, Brian, thanks so much for the introduction. I as you read it, I cringe a little bit because there's a lot of alphabet soups in there, and it makes me feel like it's a little stressful to hear it. So I'm going to work on making it a little bit more digestible so that people actually understand what all that means.
That's good, because now I feel like I need to get adjusted after reading all of that a little bit.
Yeah, right.
But it's all cool. So just tell us real briefly, what are nutrigenomic? Am I even pronouncing that correctly?
Yeah,
nutrigenomics and epigenetic. What is that?
So nutrition and genomics is combined to produce the word nutrigenomics. So you look at nutrition and you look at your genetics and you see how the certain vitamins and minerals help express your body's full potential. Let's, for example, if I'm a pharmaceutical based company and I want to come up with a drug, I understand the biochemistry of things and I can block the action of certain enzymes so I don't create inflammatory response or cholesterol buildup or whatever it may be. But all of those enzymes require micronutrients, minerals like magnesium or zinc or selenium, or they require proper B vitamins. So basically we can understand by doing that genetic test. You know, when you do the genetic test where you find out about where your family is from, I always said if I had a little more money, I'd create a commercial right after that, say, hey, and once you find out where your family is from, why don't you learn why there's anxiety, depression, compulsion, addictions, cardiovascular cancers, whatever that tend to run in the family, because you have some of these weak links here, and we can support that nutritionally by understanding what they are and give you a little bit more of the nutrients so that we can really fish in a stocked pond to be able to help really customize a recovery strategy. So that's what nutrigenomics is. Epigenetics means environmentally. So you have your genetics, and epi means on top of that. So if you have stressors, traumas, chemical exposures, living in Florida, there's a lot of mold, viruses, toxins, all of those things will create a perfect storm when they impact your specific genetic tendencies to create a chronic health issue. Hopefully that made a little more sense than the intro.
It did, and I would imagine that you mentioned viruses in there. I would imagine that this last 6, 8 months has been a pretty interesting time. But going back a little bit, first of all, as a chiropractor, you were kind of forced to see patients locally, right? Because they have to be within such a distance from your office. But now you have the ability with what you're doing now, which we're going to get into, to be able to speak with patients and have patients all over the world, I guess, at this point, right?
Correct.
So that's opened up the door for you in a lot of different ways. So are you still you still doing some chiropractic work also?
Some of it, as we talked a little bit about earlier, I am no longer going to be having a physical space of 2,000 square foot where I have people coming in with a brick and mortar type business. I think once a chiropractor, sort of always a chiropractor, in the sense that you think holistically about the body, you understand the physical relationship to health, and you understand the importance. But how I got into this, I know we helped your family, as you mentioned, with some of the advanced tools that we had, but I would have someone that would go on the DRX 9000 and they would do amazing, and other people that wouldn't do so amazing. And they had very similar presentations in terms of what the MRI showed, but they have completely different, like snowflakes, completely different fingerprints, if you will, of their life, of their stressors, of their relationships, of their past history, of their blood type. So basically I wanted to delve deeper is, why is it the ones that are getting better, and why is it the ones that aren't? And that's where you look at blood work, inflammatory markers, if they like their job, their nutrition, how active they are, because really optimal health has to do with all of that. So that's kind of how I transitioned into, I want to help more people. And then it just continues to snowball from there.
That's awesome. Before we continue, if anybody that is watching has any questions for Dr. Joel Rosen, please drop them in the comments. We will be able to answer those questions as we go. And so I'm excited to learn. I've been hearing more and more about adrenal fatigue. I would imagine, and you correct me if I'm wrong, but I would think during a pandemic, people tend to have more adrenal fatigue than normal. So I guess with that said, can tell us a little bit about what is adrenal fatigue, so everybody can know.
No, that's a great question. So the site that I developed is called The Truth About Adrenal Fatigue, because it's an outdated model. And the traditional approach, even in medical schools, they're not taught that the adrenals fatigue. They don't. But in theory, the old model of adrenal fatigue is that the brain signals to the adrenals, hey, there's a stressful situation, you've got to make stress hormones. And then what happens is, the thought is that the adrenals, because they've been told so many times over and over and over again, there's a stressful situation, you got to make stress hormones. Eventually, the thought process was that those adrenals no longer produce an adequate amount and they fatigue, right? So that has really proven to not be true, in the sense that if it is true, it's an autoimmune condition, and it's called adrenal insufficiency, or Addison's disease. And there's very few people that have exhaustion and fatigue that actually have Addison's disease. But the challenge is that you could still be exhausted, burnt out, not handle your stress very well, crash in the middle of the day, but you have a normal adrenal output. So unfortunately, what happens is, a lot of those people that are exhausted and burnt out and don't handle stress very well, that produce not an adequate amount, but not enough to be a negative, like a positive test. And what happens is, there's shades of gray, if you will, and the baby gets thrown out with the bathwater, and they're told, sorry, you must be crazy, your test results are normal. The problem is, there's so many other physiological things that can go wrong. You're assuming that the brain is sending the message. So that's a pituitary thing that cannot happen. Or you're assuming that the adrenals produce a quality amount of hormone, or there's so many things, Brian, that can go wrong. So the truth about adrenal fatigue is it's kind of like saying if there's a thermometer outside and it's really hot or really cold, and the thermometer is registering really hot or really cold, that there's something wrong with the thermometer. You have to fix the thermometer. But really, it's the environment that's impacting the thermometer to read that reading. So that's the truth about adrenal fatigue is that it's really all of the stressors that impact you on a day-to-day basis that impact your ability to handle stress. And really, we've learned that it's the brain, it's the immune system, it's the endocrine system, it's the nervous system. They're all one of the same now, and they all get impacted to the point where your body just, think of it like this, because you're in business, supply and demand. You have an imbalance of a ratio of supply and demand. The demand to make and handle stressors and the supply to be able to do it is unequal. And that's not a good, favorable relationship. If I work in downtown New York and I'm working at minimum wage and I have huge overhead, I'm not going to thrive. So that's how and then on top of that, with the press and the skies falling and how terrible everything is, because that really is what sells eyeballs to watch, unfortunately,
Right.
only plays on those nuances and makes it even much more debilitating, if you will.
So take us back prior to the pandemic versus, starting back, I guess, in March. Prior to that, compared to what you've seen since the pandemic broke out, has there been more people that realize that they have adrenal fatigue?
You know what? It's a good question. I think it's already been its own pandemic, if you will, because think about everyone who has a supply and demand problem. They have 25 different windows open on their computer. They're working not only 9 to 5 anymore. They're working 9 to 9 or longer. They have multiple to-do lists. And they're overwhelmed. They're not getting really great nutrition. They're relying on caffeine and stimulants and sugary foods, eating maybe at later times of the night, not getting great sleep. So it was already a problem to begin with. And I think it's only worse now because of the pivots that are having to be made in terms of now I don't have that income coming in or security, or there's also all of that, the isolation, because we really are creatures of contact and communication and community. So it's made things worse that were already pretty stressful to begin with.
Gotcha. Now I know that you mentioned in your bio that you had suffered yourself with adrenal fatigue. How can people determine if they have it? How did you know that you had it?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think subjectively, historically, I would tell people if you're not handling stress appropriately, it has to be on your radar. So meaning like if you have a stressor that you can deep down say it impacted me much more than it should have. I had butterflies in my stomach. My heart rate was racing. It was difficult to breathe. When I stood up, I got lightheaded. I'm not sleeping. Those types of things, because really you're losing your ability to do the basics, right? Like you're losing the ability of your body to handle stress. And in this way, it's the stress of regular maintenance of your vitals, like blood pressure, heart rate, temperature, pulse, all those things. So I would say if those things are falling or failing or not working real well, that's a pretty good sign. On top of that, other things like energy production, I don't wake up energy, I crash in the middle of the day, or I have more energy at night. So something's wrong with the circadian rhythm. That's another good clue. As of course, then brain fog is another good clue. And then unfortunately, it impacts the sexual hormones. So libido, motivation, drive, vigor, ability to bounce back. those are other very good clues. So I don't think that there's anything better historically than all of those things that you could get from a blood test. And a good doctor should really be able to say and put aside whether or not it's a controversial term or not, and it's believed to be real or not. Those things that the patient is coming to you with and complaining and telling you about are real to them. And they're already stigmatized for their lack of ability to do their life. They don't need gasoline on the fire by a doctor telling them that it's not real and that their blood tests are normal and they should just, suck it up or go get therapy or be put on an antidepressant, because that's ultimately what happens.
Gotcha. So one thing that you mentioned that stood out to me, brain fog. So even though we're reaching our 50s, right? And you may tend to think that you're forgetting a lot of things. It could actually be fatigue, not necessarily that you're just getting old. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I mean, think of it again, a demand and supply, right? So if you don't have enough supply for the demand that you take to run the business, and in this case, the business of your body, breaking of the weak links in the chain can happen in a multitude of areas. And that could be in neurons, and that could be in your ability to form memories and your ability to short-term think about things. In fact, there's lots of studies that show long-term release of cortisol, which is what the stress hormone is, impacts the area in your brain called your hippocampus, which is really for memory. And it's for also balancing your circadian rhythm. And unfortunately, one of the clues that we see of someone that may have some early signs of Alzheimer's, not just forgetfulness, but they're staying up later and later. Their circadian rhythms longer and longer. A lot of patients will tell me, yeah, mom just doesn't go to bed early anymore and she's staying up later and later. That cortisol has been beating down that hippocampus for so long, and it shrinks, and it ultimately creates a lot of those cognitive changes.
Wow. That actually explains a lot about my family, boy. My grandmother used to stay up all night, and she never did that. So, that's probably something that even back then was maybe something she was suffering.
Yeah, that was a sign. Yep.
Unbelievable. So, what would you say then are the best tests to determine if you actually have adrenal fatigue?
Yeah, so there are more inferences. Like, a lot of people will say, okay, I did a saliva test, and that's the typical go-to. They'll do a saliva test, and the saliva measures your level of cortisol in your saliva. And it's an okay test. Like, it's done at several times throughout the day, and your cortisol rhythm, like, you have high cortisol in the morning. We should get up, like, in theory, bound out of bed, have lots of energy. And then in the nighttime, we should have low cortisol. And so it should go from high to low. And taking a saliva test can measure the slope of your rhythm, which it's good for, but it's very limited. There's other tests that they do, like urinalysis of cortisol. But honestly, Brian, what I would tell people is the best test is A, the history, a really great history that we just talked about, and then B, blood work. Because with blood work, you can see signs of inflammation, you can see iron issues, you can see cholesterol issues, you can see liver enzymes, electrolytes and minerals, and kidney values and proteins, and other more sophisticated inflammatory markers. And that's really giving the astute doctor information that there's inflammation, stress, mineral challenges, cholesterol levels, liver. There's stuff going on in a symphony of an orchestra that explains the body's under stress, really. So I would say, that's not the conventional answer a lot of people would probably expect to hear, but a good blood test that looks at it from narrow ranges, like looks at it from, hey, we're going to explain to you if you qualify for an A-rated insurance policy, not if you're just going to be told that you need to be put on a medication. Because those are the lab ranges, and the doctor is a very busy person. As you know, you have an appointment for 11 and you don't get in there to 11:45, and they've seen so many people. They don't have a lot of time to talk to you. So those lab ranges, well, hey, if you're not an outlier, then everything's okay, but that doesn't mean you're feeling good.
Right.
That doesn't mean, like I say that you may be getting a C+ on the test, but you're not failing the grade, and the doctor's telling you your blood tests are normal. So I would put an asterisk beside my answer in terms of the answer is a good blood test that's looked at from a functional range where you can see where the person's getting a C+ versus not waiting for them to get an F before you decide to do anything about it.
Gotcha. Interesting. So I guess with that said, what are there actual supplements that are best for adrenal fatigue, and how do you find them? Where do you even go to look for them?
Yeah. So I think the best. I mean, I tell people if grandma or nona didn't recognize the food that you're eating, it's probably not a good food, right? I mean,
Right.
the food from the earth, that the minerals and the leafy greens and the dense colors, those are phytonutrients. We call those bioflavonoids, and unfortunately, our soils are so depleted of these minerals nowadays. I would say the best supplement is going to be your nutritional value of the foods that you're eating, for sure. Then I would say potentially if there is inflammation, omega fatty acids. So people say fish oils. I'm a bigger fan of plant-based oils. Those can be really, really good inflammatory nutrients. But I would tell you, this is kind of a trick answer, is really protecting your circadian rhythm. So meaning if you don't want to be like grandma and going to bed at 3 o'clock because she's having some early signs of dementia, then you want to get up when the sun, like if you and I were to go camping, we wouldn't sleep into 11 because the sun would be beating down and we'd be really hot and we'd be already up. And then at nighttime, we wouldn't be on our phones and have a refrigerator that has all foods that kept cold. We would, as soon as the sun went down, it'd be dark. We might have a campfire or two, but we would be going to bed pretty early. So I would say like getting our body readapted to the circadian rhythm of the earth is and eating good nutritional dense food, and then looking at maybe some natural omega fatty acids, which they're called essential oils because we can't produce them on our own. We need them. Those are a good, it's not sophisticated rocket science. It's common sense stuff.
I think essential oils are starting to make a name for themselves more too these days. I see that popping up quite a bit. People out at restaurants dropping a couple of drops of essential oil in their iced tea and things like that, right?
Right. Yeah. It's interesting to see. I mean, there's essential oils. There's the for healing processes in terms of like you have lavender and menthol and stuff like that. But then there's essential fatty acids, which is an oil, which I also see people doing that as well. So it's a little bit of a different slant depending on if it's essential oils or essential fatty acids. A little different, but similar in context. Yeah.
Gotcha. If anybody has any questions out there that they would like to ask Dr. Joel Rosen, drop them in the comments. We'll be happy to address them. And so I guess speaking of addressing, is it necessary when you have adrenal fatigue to use supplements, or can you address it in other ways besides having to go that route to get supplements?
Yeah, I would probably say if someone has a chronic, I mean, it doesn't happen overnight, Brian, right? I mean, it's slowly accumulating, right? It's like a water that eventually overflows and then the proverbial straw breaks the camel's back, right? And It wasn't like the cavity happened overnight, right? So in that regards, I'd say there's probably some nutritional deficiencies that taken some time to get there, right? So working on that point, like looking at your nutrients and getting really good, healthy, dense foods. But probably like there is going to need to be some targeted nutritionals. Like there are some what they call adrenal adaptogens that can be really helpful to support the adrenals. There's adrenal glandulars that could be helpful, or adaptogenic, they call it like ashwagandha or holy basil. There's rhodiola, there's mushroom blends, there's different things, but I don't make those recommendations, Brian, unless I've seen their tests and I say, okay, you have like a major bacteria infection of your gut. and let's say it's H. pylori. So we're going to take some of this targeted nutrient because we know you have that, and we know that this is what does that to fix that. So there are targeted nutrients, but it's part of the workup in terms of, well, let's figure out what's happened physiologically because of all these stressors. And food probably in today's day and age is not enough because of the poor quality of the nutrients.
Right. Awesome. So you mentioned that you now take care of patients all over the world. So is this something you can help to diagnose, like doing a Zoom call, like kind of like what we're doing right now? You can meet with patients that way?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have clients, and this is not to brag, but I do a lot of consulting on those genetic tests. Australia, South Africa, Israel, Europe, all over North America. And basically, I look at their past history of blood work, and then we can send a urine test. I can send a saliva test. I can send these tests overseas. It really is a small world now. And then they send it back. And then we have the advantage of being able to interpret them, whether they were in Boca Raton or Vero Beach or in Hungary. You know, I mean, that's who I'm seeing nowadays. Yeah.
Wow. So that's pretty widespread. That's exciting stuff. So I know you mentioned you have a website where people can find you, right? That's the Truth About Adrenal Fatigue.com, right?
That's correct. Yep. Yep.
Is there a place where they can get some free information on your website?
Yeah, well, that has free information. I have a YouTube channel, and I have over 400 videos on there. And you just search Dr. Joel Rosen, Adrenal Fatigue, that will come up. Also, Facebook group with over 45,000 people. It's called Adrenal Fatigue Recovery, or Dr. Joel Rosen, and that's a private group. And between all of that, Brian, there's lots of information out there. A lot of people will tell me they'll binge watch my videos and then they'll get back to me, and it's kind of eerie. Like, they tell me like all the things that I said, and I mean, it's amazing. You know, sometimes you feel like those videos aren't getting reached, but then someone from Ireland will email you and tell you, hey, your video made a lot of sense. So it's good.
I think that I would imagine that Facebook group is almost like a community where people that do have adrenal fatigue can actually hang out and get to know other people, right? And talk about what they're doing to help themselves.
Yeah. And you have to be careful because sometimes, like, misery likes company, right? As long as the company's miserable too. So they sometimes have like an identity that's their identity. Right? I am adrenal fatigue. That's who I am. And that's a big part of the recovery strategy is gratitude and celebration, you know, in terms of we have so much stressors in our life. I was just listening to a podcast and it was talking about, like, think back. It was about a monk story. And they were told to think back about things in their life that they didn't deserve that they got. And every single one of them in the initial phases of the monk school talked about, well, it wasn't fair when my sister died, or it wasn't fair when people were mad at me. But they never really said, well, it was unexpected, and it didn't seem fair that I was born to a family that we didn't have to eat food out of a dumpster, or we had, and we don't think of it in that way in terms of the blessings that we have. And the gratitude that we need to have, because if we constantly focus on what's not working and what's not fair, and how you may be right and you may be accurate and it might be real, but that's your reality, you know, and that's what you reinforce. And that will create feedback loops in your brain that will constantly get activated. So I think, like, it's really important to put that in perspective and know that, you know, there's a lot of good things in the world that we should be grateful and we should celebrate well, for sure.
Nice. So, and you also, not to forget that you have a podcast as well, right? People can find you where? for that?
Yeah, that's on iTunes, wherever there's podcasts, and it's called Your Adrenal Fix. It's kind of a play on the word fix. You know, you're getting your fix of adrenals. But yeah, and I'm prolific on that now as well too, because it's one of those things, Brian, that I can't stop talking about. Like I'll say something to a client, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like everyone needs to know that, and I'm never out of ideas. You know.
Right. Absolutely. Awesome. Well, we definitely appreciate you joining us today, Dr. Joel Rosen. It's always good to catch up with you. It's only been about at least 10 years since we last got together.
Yeah, I think longer, and we're going to talk after the show too, for sure, right?
Absolutely, would love to. So thank you again for being on. I will send the recording of this so you'll have it as well. Just so everybody knows out there, next week we will have on Dennis Edwards of National Credit Partners. We're going to be talking about debt restructuring and how to be able to not actually make you hurt your credit, but be able to help your cash flow. So that'll be our live at 5 for next Tuesday at 5 o'clock. Anyone else that would like to be on the show, please feel free to reach out to us here at Pharus Global. You can find our contact information at pharusglobal.com. Dr. Joel, thank you very much again for being here. And we will see everybody next week, Tuesday, live at 5. Have a good night, everybody.
Thanks, Brian.